Hi friends, so I don't know if you've been watching the recent development about Representative Tulsi Gabbard on her supporting a anti-BDS legislation. She did a video, it's called Watch This for Why I Voted for HRes246 and Why I'll Always Defend our right to free speech. That's the title of her recent explanation about why she supported HRes246. If you look at HRes246, the general explanation of it, it says it's introduced in the House the 21st of March 2019. This resolution opposes the global boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, the BDS movement, and other efforts targeting Israel and states that BDS undermines the possibility for a negotiated solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The resolution urges both sides to return to direct negotiations and expresses support for a solution resulting in the state of Israel existing alongside a democratic Palestinian state. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. As I've said, I've done a couple of videos already on Tulsi Gabbard and how I felt she's flying under the radar of this issue about Palestine and Israel. And I really feel like this is sort of an indication of that, because she either doesn't understand, firstly, that it's not a conflict, because that's like saying that a police officer in the United States that executes a black person, which is happening, 3 black people every day being executed by police, it's state sanctioned sort of thing. Police, they're being executed basically by police. In the United States, in most states, every single day. Now, could you call that a conflict if somebody's sitting in their car and they're not doing anything, or if they're running away and being shot in the back, or if they're just being killed for reaching for their driver's license, or being killed? There's a whole lot of crazy events that happen in the United States where police are just executing black people. So you can't really call that a conflict. It's a definite structural racism that police very, very rarely go to prison unless their name is Mohammed and they shot a white woman, which is one of the police that shot an Australian white woman in one of those states. His name was Mohammed and he's gone to prison for 12 years. Unless your name is Mohammed and you're black, which he was, you are probably not going to see the inside of a prison. So that's, sort of how that is. And so, it's not a conflict, and the Israeli-Palestinian thing is not a conflict. And I invite, I don't believe that Tulsi Gabbard doesn't understand what is happening to Palestinians in this apartheid state of Israel. And it is worse than what South Africa was at the height of apartheid. Much, much worse. It's an ethno-supremacist state. And before this, Palestine was given away by the British. It was given away basically by imperialists. Actually, Jews and Palestinians used to get on just fine in Palestine. Western meddling has caused a lot of the conflicts now that are happening in the Middle East. Just read The Management of Savagery by Max Blumenthal to find out how that has been orchestrated. In fact, it's actually Christians that caused a lot of problems for Jews in Europe. It's actually Christians that have a problem usually with Jews. But in fact, Palestinians and Jews and Palestinians were a majority at the time before imperialists gave away their homeland, something that they had no right to do, and gave it away. So anyway, I invite people to, I'm not going to get into the whole, I'm no expert on this, but I've watched a lot of programs about this from the Empire Files. They've done 7 great programs about the various issues in relation to this issue of Palestine and Israel. And it's very, very clear that it is what's going on there is a genocide of Palestinians, and they're basically trying to wipe out Palestinians, and that most Israelis openly call for a genocide of Palestinians. That's how far gone they are. So I'm going to put this in a nutshell. When you have a population, when most of the population are actually openly calling for genocide of Palestinians, the only thing that's left really is to do what we did, and I was around for this, the boycott, divestment and sanctions, what was happening in South Africa, the apartheid state situation in South Africa. That's all the Palestinians have left, because if they retaliate against this brutal occupation, which is absolutely a brutal occupation, they're being executed at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza, and they're non-violently protesting, so they can't do that. They're not allowed to non-violently protest. They get executed at the fence. There's been 200 plus people, including medics and children and paraplegics, being executed at the fence of the open-air prison that is Gaza. And there's been thousands injured by live ammunition, and many of those have intentionally been shot with these bullets that shatter lower limbs, so that basically a lot of the young men that protest end up amputees. So they can't protest non-violently, right? And they're not allowed to resist an occupation, which is their right to do so. I think non-violence works much better. A non-violent protest, and even though they've been non-violently protesting every week now, every Friday at the Great March of Return, every Friday, and being executed by snipers, and it's all been there's footage of it, and you can see that in this new documentary by Abby Martin, a film by Abby Martin called Gaza Fights for Freedom, I think it's called. You can find it at GazaFightsForFreedom.com. And soon, maybe you can even see it now. You can watch that, I don't know, you pay a few dollars and you can watch that amazing documentary, and it's highly acclaimed. So they can't non-violently protest, the Palestinians, on their right to return to their homeland. They're refugees. And for the end of the blockade, which is basically they have 4 hours of electricity a day, they have water that's not really drinkable. There's all sorts of sabotage going on to make it impossible for them to live in Gaza. They're being brutally cracked down on in the West Bank. Their land is being stolen illegally against UN resolutions. It's illegally being taken from them, and that's been happening now for decades. So Tulsi Gabbard is suggesting in this video that that there should be a two-state solution. Okay, well, how stupid is that? What a ridiculous suggestion. Because if you look at the map, and I'm going to show you the map, if you look at how much land has been taken from Palestinians, villages, ancient villages being bulldozed down, people just being tossed out of their homes and their homes being bulldozed with the help of the state. The state helps these illegal Israeli settlers settle on top of Palestinian villages and homes. Gives them all that helps them with the infrastructure. That's actually illegal, and there's been many UN resolutions against that. So basically most of their land has been taken from them, what is left. So if there was a two-state solution, it would be ridiculous. So either Tulsi Gabbard doesn't know anything about, I'm no expert by any means, but you only have to watch some independent media on this issue and you can find out. I can't believe that she doesn't know this. She watches the Jimmy Dore show. I know she watches the Jimmy Dore show, right? She's even been on the Jimmy Dore show. And the Jimmy Dore show talks about Palestine, talks about Israel, talks about the apartheid state of Israel. I'm sure she's heard of the Empire Files by Abby Martin. I mean, Ilhan Omar has heard of the Empire Files. Surely Tulsi Gabbard has heard of the Empire Files. And if she has, surely she has seen those programs. I do not believe that she doesn't know what's going on there. I just don't believe that. So isn't it kind of disingenuous to be saying that there should be a two-state solution? If she really, and if she's that clueless that she doesn't know what's going on, then maybe she shouldn't be where she is. And she definitely shouldn't be president of the United States if that's how clueless she is. Okay, now Tulsi Gabbard has not been pressed on this issue about her position on Israel. I've said this before, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but she hasn't said that she would not give $10.5 million of military aid to Israel every single day which is what is happening right now and has been happening now for many, many, many years. The US has been giving 10.5 million or more, or a bit less, depending on what decade it is, to Israel, to the apartheid state of Israel, and the only way they could, this is every day. Tulsi Gabbard has not rejected that funding because without the help of the US, the apartheid state of Israel would not be able to continue. So with their help, the military aid, the $10.5 million every single day of military aid, they would not be able to continue oppressing and occupying the Palestinians and continuing on this genocide. And it is a genocide. There is no other, ethnic cleansing, there is no other way you can view this if you truly look at the information provided about what is truly happening to Palestinians and what has been happening since the Nakba, since the catastrophe in the late 40s. If you don't know what's happening, then you have not been doing research, and you've been swallowing the MSN and also the Hasbro trolling. That is the Israeli government's way of keeping the narrative pro-Israel so that they can continue on this genocide. It's an ethno-supremacist state, is what Israel is. So, and so, like I say, when you have most of the population, and this is not hyperbole, when you have most of the population in Israel saying that, openly calling for genocide of Palestinians, then you cannot, and Palestinians are not allowed to non-violently protest at the Great March of Return without being executed by snipers, and they're not allowed to retaliate as they have the right to do because they're occupied people and retaliate violently. They're not allowed to do that either. What are they left? What is left for them? Tulsi Gabbard. What is left for Palestinians to do? And when the world turns their back mostly on this issue and keeps calling it some kind of conflict, it is not a conflict, like I explained. It is not a conflict. What are these Palestinians supposed to do? I digress, but I have not seen any journalist pressing her on whether she's going to continue this $10.5 million in military aid to Israel, whether she retracts the support she gave for Israel in her Christians United for Israel speech. If you haven't seen that, please check it out. I will leave a link to that in the information section. Just look for Tulsi Gabbard, Christians for a United Israel. That's CUFI, C-U-F-I, 2015. Have a look at that speech. It's a real eye-opener, that speech. If she still supports Israel as she full-on does in that speech, I mean, it's like really scary. That CUFI is a real Christian fascist group. That's what it is. So if she's still, that's 4 years ago. Somebody should be asking her, do you still stand by what you said in that speech in 2015? There's no point in saying you're against war, and there's no point in saying that you're want peace if you're okay with what's going on to Palestinians. If you don't think they have a right to ask the world for help because they cannot do anything within their own country, as I mentioned, non-violently or violently, it's all a no-no, right? And they pay big for it. So, what are they supposed to do? So they are asking the world to help them, like South Africa, like Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was still on the terrorist list, I think, in 2008. And the CIA helped capture Nelson Mandela. They helped the apartheid state of South Africa capture Nelson Mandela, and he was locked away for decades. This is what the U.S. does. It supports white supremacist. It supports white supremacy. It is based on white supremacy. The founding fathers were white supremacists. They had slaves. Thomas Jefferson had a slave whom he had 5 children with, whom he raped and had 5 children with. George Washington was making his money by killing off indigenous people and selling their land. These are the people that everybody applauds, these so-called founding fathers. And that it's all based on white supremacy. And America is, the Ku Klux Klan was thriving in the early part of the 20th century. They had a huge march down the street in Washington, D.C. You can have a look at the photos. The U.S. was also supporting, their corporations were functioning in Nazi Germany and making literally a killing. Even one of them, I think it was it Bayer? They were called another name, but now they're Bayer. They were actually, I think, helping make the chemical gas that was killing the Jews in the Holocaust. I'm digressing here, but it's like, the hypocrisy is just insane. I can't stand it. And, it's like these people like Tulsi Gabbard and others like that, and even some so-called left commentators talking about this issue. And look, I'm no expert on this at all, and I probably say things maybe that are a bit off, as in not quite right. I do it in good faith, but there are people. I saw somebody today, some left commentator, who just really doesn't have much of a clue about what's happening there and sort of thinks this is a good idea what Tulsi Gabbard has done. She called it a conflict too, this particular commentator. She probably, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say she just doesn't know about the issue. She hasn't really looked into it. Anyway, but I wish that Abby Martin would get her hands on Tulsi Gabbard and do an interview, because Abby Martin would not let Tulsi Gabbard get away with calling it a conflict or saying there needs to be a two-state solution. Abby Martin could run rings around Tulsi Gabbard, and most people that are supporting this two-state solution. Except that, unfortunately, I don't think Tulsi Gabbard wants to really be pressed on this. I saw her being interviewed. I'm not going to I'm not going to sort of talk again about this issue. I've done 2 videos already on it, and this was a few months, 2 or 3 months ago. And I knew this was going to happen, and I knew that she was flying under the radar. And I know that if she became president, not going to happen, but if she did, she would be still supplying Israel with $10.5 million a day of military aid. And she'd still be taking her talking points probably from AIPAC, from the Israel lobby. And the Israel lobby is behind this, resolution, this HRes246. So, what is she? She's probably not going to push back on the Israel lobby if she's going with this one, right? If she really believed, like she said in her title here, I'll always defend our right to free speech. What about the free speech of Palestinians have no voice. The only voice they have is the global community supporting a boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and that is what helped bring an end to the apartheid state of South Africa. That was one of the main things. And celebrities refused to perform in Sun City in South Africa. I know, I was around at that time. I even did, when I was doing in a band, we did some benefits to support the end of apartheid in South Africa. I saw all of that and how it worked. So that's what they have. And from what I understand, people want to be able to live side by side with, and what is wrong with this, side by side with Israelis and have equal rights with Israelis. Is that so terrible? If Palestinians want to live side by side with Israelis and get equal rights with Israelis, is that so terrible? A one-state solution is where it's at. That is what should be happening. And anybody who is opposed to a one-state solution, what are they opposed to? Israelis and Palestinians living in peace? I think that will be very difficult because, like I said, the majority of Israelis openly call for a genocide of Palestinians. They view them like they're vermin, literally. I'm not kidding. It's like they're replicating the kind of awful stuff, and I'm sorry to say this, the sort of awful stuff that happened in Nazi Germany. The same kind of attitudes that the Nazis had towards the Jews is being replicated right now and has been for a while in Israel. I'm not kidding. That is not an exaggeration. Just have a look at those documentaries that I've pointed out by from the Empire Files that Abby Martin, they've so excellently done. They went there and they filmed and they interviewed. They've done their research, which you cannot say about the mainstream media. And you cannot say about some of these clueless politicians who are either clueless or being completely disingenuous. And if they're clueless, then they should not be in the position they are, and they certainly shouldn't be running for president. And if they're not clueless, then they are just business as usual. Business as usual for these politicians with this pro-Israel and allowing Israel to dictate foreign policy. And that's what is happening, and that's what's been happening. They are closely connected to the US and the foreign policy that is put forward. And so is Saudi Arabia, although Saudi Arabia, they don't like MBS, they don't like Mohammed bin Salman, and so they're starting to slag off Saudi Arabia. But it's like the joke is, they call, John Bolton calls all these other countries the troika of tyranny, and George W. Bush used to call it the axis of evil. The axis of evil is Saudi Arabia, the US empire, and apartheid Israel. That is the real axis of evil. So I haven't really gone through her. I'm going to leave a link to her speech, her short video, and I'll just play it at the end of this video, and you can have a look at it. So in part of that speech, she says, I voted for HRes246 because I support a two-state solution that provides for the rights of both Israel and Palestine to exist and for their people to live in peace, with security in their homes. I don't believe the BDS movement is the only or best way to accomplish that. However, I will continue to defend those who choose to exercise their right to free speech without threat of legal action. She says she doesn't believe the BDS movement is the only way or best way to accomplish that. Has she got any other ideas? Because look how long this nonsense of so-called negotiations has been going on, and this pretense. You cannot go anywhere when the government literally talks about Palestinians like they're vermin. That's like, I'm sorry to use this again, but that's like appealing to the better nature of people that have the kind of attitudes that the Nazis had about Jews. That's really what it is. Have you looked at, for example, I think it was the foreign minister, was it Ayelet Shakad? She's not in government anymore. She tried to run in her own party in the last election and failed miserably, and she sort of exited for a while. I'm sure she'll be back. But Ayelet Shaked was one of the people in the government, the Likud party, this full-on right-wing party, and she literally viewed Palestinians as sort of snakes. She even said that, snakes. I have nothing against snakes. I'm vegan. All animals are wonderful to me, but a lot of people have speciesist ideas and use animals in a negative way to express hatred towards humans. That's unfortunate. But that's her use of that word snake, was that they're lower life forms, that they're the lowest life form kind of nonsense. That's a very speciesist thing, but that's how she would see it. So that's the sort of attitude. Where can you go with that when when Palestinians are ruled by these sort of people? Where can you go with that in a country? You cannot. There's nothing you can do except ask the global community to try and end this dreadful, brutal occupation. I mean, I cannot tell you how many awful things are going on there. It would just take too long. It's appalling. You have to look into it. I implore you all to watch those 7 programs by the Empire Files and try and track down the movie Gaza Fights for Freedom, the film by Abby Martin. It was done recently. Oliver Stone was there. It was apparently, people thought it was fantastic. Also look at Killing Gaza by Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen. I did an interview with Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen a year or so ago when I was able to do live streams. I can't do it because of the poor connectivity I have rurally now, sadly. So I can't do that anymore, and I would love to be able to interview some of these people, and get Abby to talk about this thing that Tulsi Gabbard has put out about why she supported that stupid resolution, that anti-BDS resolution. But check out Killing Gaza. Check out that interview I did with Max Blumenfeld and Ben Norton. Just look on my site, Faint Signals from Vega, and you can find it. Anyway, so she continued on in this video, HRes246 does not in any way limit or hinder our First Amendment rights. In fact, it affirms every American's right to exercise free speech or for or against U.S. foreign policy, as well as the right of Israeli and Palestinian people to live in safe and sovereign states free from fear and violence and with mutual recognition. Now, why is Tulsi Gabbard against Palestinians and Israelis living in the same state? Why? Somebody needs to ask her that. Why? Why? Why is anyone afraid of Palestinians and Israelis living in the same state? Palestinians and Jews used to live very happily beside one another in Palestine before all this awful stuff happened. They did. And if you look at Ahed Tamimi, this is I think she's 16 or 17 now, 17-year-old hero who was thrown in prison for 9 months for slapping an Israeli soldier who had shot her cousin in the head around their property, and their family has been killed one by one, their extended family and some of their family, by the state of Israel, right? She has actually said that this is the sort of incredible sort of person that she is. She has actually said that Israelis are actually victims too of this attitude, because they, this terrible attitude towards Palestinians and the way they think about Palestinians. They are victims as well, because they've basically been brainwashed, and they've been indoctrinated to believe that Palestinians are lesser beings, basically. That's the sort of person she is, right? So, anybody who's against Palestinians and Israelis living in the same state, in peace with equal rights, they have something to hide. They have something to hide. It's because they do not want that to be the case. They do not want Palestinians anywhere near Israelis. They're favoring this ethno-supremacist notion that Netanyahu has even put out, where he says he literally said he doesn't care about anybody else except having this Jewish state, basically. I'll show you the meme that indicates this quote from him. So anybody who isn't on board with a one-state solution and isn't on board with Palestinians and Israelis living in peace, side by side with equal rights, has something to hide. Doesn't understand the issue or has something to hide. Either way, it's not good. So I would say Tulsi Gabbard, just like I thought, she's pretending like she's in support of freedom of speech, like people to be able to say they support it, but she is not going to support that. And she is really doesn't want that to be, she doesn't want people to have that avenue to end this ethno-supremacist apartheid state, which is brutally occupying and killing Palestinians, and there's a genocide going on every single day. She doesn't want that, which is probably the only thing they have now, Palestinians, to end this dreadful situation. She doesn't want that to be the ability, she doesn't want that to be us to be able to, or that to be able to be in place, so that they have some hope of ending this dreadful situation. That's appalling. You know what I'm saying? That is appalling. They're one of the most oppressed people on the planet. It's just horrific what is happening to them there. And she is taking away their only, or wants to disable their only way of ending this dreadful sort of genocide, ethnic cleansing that's going on there. Because it's not going to happen from within the state of within this state, with the attitudes that three-quarters of, or the majority of Israelis have, that genocidal, openly genocidal ideation towards Palestinians. It is not going to happen from within. It has to happen externally. So anyway, there you have it. And I implore people to, anybody who carries on about, oh, that's a good idea, please put them in in touch with the Empire Files and the 7 programs, I'm going to leave a link to those 7 programs. Please copy and paste them into threads where people are thinking, oh, it's okay, that's fine what Tulsi's doing. And somebody ought to ask her, do you still stand by that speech you made at the Christians United for Israel in 2015? Do you stand by what you said in that speech, and what do you reject out of that speech? And please watch it, because it's an eye-opener. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. I probably could have gone through that speech, but that's pretty much, I think, this is just how I feel about it. But what do I know? I mean, I'm not a journalist. I'm a nobody who just is anti-war, anti-imperialist, and I'm a vegan. I'm for ending animal exploitation, and I'm also for supporting any vulnerable citizens of the world, no matter what country they're in. If they're vulnerable and being oppressed, truly oppressed, I'm for ending that. If we're not for supporting the most vulnerable on the planet, then what are we? You know what I'm saying? What are we if we're not for that? Non-human animals are the most vulnerable. So are Palestinians. There is indigenous people who are incredibly vulnerable in different lands. In my own country, in the United States, there's a whole lot of issues. But the United States, the U.S. empire, is at the center of a lot of the support of white supremacy and white supremacist imperialism. And there's a great book, I think, by Gerald Horne. He's a professor in Houston, in Texas, and he's done a really excellent book. There's some books that, and Goliath by Max Blumenthal is another great book. I have that. I haven't read it yet, but Noam Chomsky says it's a fantastic book. So anyway, we need to stand up for Palestinians, because if we don't, they cannot change this from within Israel. They can't do it non-violently, and they can't do it violently. And I prefer the non-violent route. Okay, thanks for watching. Please click the subscribe button if you like the content. Please click the notification bell, otherwise you don't receive updates. And please leave comments if you like. I always enjoy your comments, and thanks so much for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.
Some of you have sent me messages and posted on social media asking for more information about why I voted the way I did on a recent resolution talking about BDS. So I wanted to give you some background and talk to you about my commitment to defending our First Amendment rights. Nothing is more fundamental to the identity of our country than the rights and freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution. Now, I've fought to defend these freedoms both as a soldier and a congresswoman, and it's why I will continue to oppose unconstitutional legislation like S1, a bill that does seek to restrict freedom of speech by imposing legal penalties against those who participate in the BDS movement. That's why I co-sponsored HRes246, to affirm our freedom of speech and right to protest or boycott for any cause, as well as stating opposition to any legislative efforts that seek to restrict these fundamental First Amendment rights. Now, I voted for HRes246 because I support a two-state solution that provides for the rights of both Israel and Palestine to exist, and for their people to live in peace with security in their homes. I don't believe BDS is the way to accomplish that. However, I will continue to defend those who choose to exercise their right to free speech without any threat of legal action. Now, HRes246 does not in any way limit or hinder our First Amendment rights. In fact, it affirms every American's right to exercise free speech for or against U.S. foreign policy, as well as the right of Israeli and Palestinian people to live in safe and sovereign states, free from fear and violence, and with mutual recognition. Now, the right to protest the actions of our government is essential if America is to truly be a free society. So no matter what our disagreements are about various political positions or choices that our government makes, we can all agree that every American should have the freedom to make those disagreements known and to protest peacefully in support of their views.